Hey, it's Alex Rather from BoardGameCo over here, and today we are going to talk about, can you review a game you've only played once? Well, of course you can. Why in the world not? But for all those people who now clicked away, clicked disliked, unsubscribed, let's talk about it, because this is a hot topic. This is always a fun conversation when it happens, because if you haven't noticed already from being on this channel, if you've watched my videos before, I like hot topics. I like having fun conversations. Now, I love playing devil's advocate, but I do always give my genuine opinion. But I enjoy a good debate. I enjoy having a conversation, and if ever there was a fun conversation to be had, it would be about whether you can review a game you've only played once, or twice, or 3 times, and we'll go through all that. But to begin with, I think as a central premise to this conversation, before we talk about whether you can review a game you've only played once, I think the first question is, why in the world shouldn't you be able to? Meaning, if you're going to say someone can't do something, if you're going to say something is wrong, there has to be a premise here. There has to be a reason why that thing is wrong. And this is my first question to you, because I'm going to give you what I think is the predominant reason people have a problem with this concept. But if I'm missing something, let me know in the comments down below. This starts off as me talking, but really it's a conversation. It's something fun to discuss, and there are always points, and almost every time I've brought something controversial up, while I often think that I covered it to a certain degree, there are always points I missed. There are always things I didn't think about, and that's part of the fun. My opinion as to why people have a problem with the idea that you can review a game that you only played once is the idea that you have not had a complete experience. Because I can't think of another reason. What would be the alternative reason not to be able to? In some way, there must be an opinion that playing a game one time does not give you enough of an experience to be able to properly review a game. Which is reasonable, by the way. I'm totally fine with that premise. Of course that's true to a degree. And that's often why one of the first things you hear, because this is where I'm going to defend the attack on it, one of the first things you hear when people are defending this concept is, well, why isn't it different than a movie? If you watch a movie once, you can review a movie once, right? I mean, you don't expect a critic to go see a movie 4 times before they give a review. And that's true. But a movie is a very different experience, because when you are watching a movie, when you are reading a book, when you are listening to music, you are effectively a passive participant in the experience. In other words, the experience is being delivered to you the way that the director, conductor, author intended, and you are passive in its process. Of course, there are things you can do to affect the process. I mean, if you decide to read a book while sitting in the most awkward, uncomfortable position, of course it can affect your experience. But that aside, ideally you are effectively consuming the product in the way it was intended. And so yeah, a single experience should often be enough, which is why I don't think the movie argument is a good one. I don't think it is. I think that a movie is a much more passive experience, and therefore you're going to experience it the way it was meant. The problem is, what defines a complete experience? Because this is where things fall apart. This is where things get a little messy, because if you're going to start with the premise that you cannot review something without having a complete experience, we have to define what a complete experience is. And this is where movies can be interesting. Can you review a TV show if you've only watched 3 episodes? Can you review a movie if it's part of a trilogy? Can you review Gloomhaven if you haven't played every single last game in the experience? Where is the line here? Because it's an interesting conversation. Where is the line? Where does the line exist? Do you review a game after you've played it twice? 3 times? 4 times? 5 times? Where is it that we've crossed a line, that there is a definitive experience that has been had, and you are now eligible to review that product? And we can take a look at the video game industry, because I think the video game industry is most comparable. In the video game industry, we often have companies like GameSpot or IGN or whatever, putting up reviews after consuming a 40 or 50 hour experience. They go through a game, maybe they're playing The Witcher or whatnot, and they fully, completely play the game, and that's when they can give a review. Do we expect every board game to be played for 50 hours before you can review it? Is that the expectation? What about a multiplayer online shooter? What about something where it's not a narrative 50-hour experience, but rather you can jump into Call of Duty and play 5 matches? That's 50 minutes. Are you now eligible to review Call of Duty? Where is the definitive line in these conversations? And I think ultimately, I have a few opinions, but when I say that you can review a game once, in my opinion, I'm coming at it from a few different angles, but the first angle that I'm coming at it is because where is the line? Unless and until you can define where the line is, what is right? If I've played Food Chain Magnate once, is that enough? What about twice? 3 times? 4? 5? If you're going to tell me that once isn't enough, don't you also have to tell me what is enough? If you're going to operate in the realm of the abstract, if you're going to operate in the realm of this isn't fine, but this is, 1 play isn't, 15 plays is. Why? Is it about game length? What about a shorter game like The Mind? Do you have to play that more times because it's a shorter experience? Is it about completing the experience because that's a single game? Is it about game time? Because you could play 50 plays of The Mind and it won't equivocate to 3 games of Food Chain Magnate. Where is the line in this conversation? We're putting a construct in place. We're putting a barrier in place as to when you can experience that product enough, that game enough to be able to give a review. So define it. Because if the closest thing you can come to defining it is once is bad, 15 times is good, is that really a helpful set of criteria? We have to be able to define what it is that makes you eligible, right? So let's define it. And that's my first problem with it. And that's why I believe you can review a game even once. But to touch upon the experiential aspect, because I think the experiential aspect is key here. If you play a game partially, then yeah, you haven't completed the experience, right? Meaning that any game, any product, any game that we play is meant to be finished. It's not necessarily meant to be finished again and again and again. But if whatever the game is, whether it's as short as Coloretto, whether it's as long as Twilight Imperium 4, ideally that single gameplay experience is something that someone is meant to have experienced. And are you really saying that a product, that a game is being created in a way that experiencing it to completion is not actually enough? Would we be okay with movies that you had to watch it 2 or 3 times to get the benefit? Isn't that a flaw in the creative process? And this is something that I'm actually going to read. I'm going to read something from Johnny Pack. Johnny Pack Canton, who's designed some incredible games. Some that I'm super excited about, some that I've loved less. But I actually just got into a conversation with him today briefly about this. I had this whole video planned either way. This just happened to be good timing. But regarding a game called Endless Winter, that I am super excited about, and I've only played once, but I'm super excited about it. I really want to play it again. But he wrote something in a blog post, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. If we are focused on player-centered design, it's in poor form to tell players that they're wrong and that the game's math actually works out perfectly on paper. As annoying as it is to hear people say the game is not balanced after only playing it once, we need to give them a little more credit. Oftentimes they are actually right, at least in the experiential sense. Due to the law of small numbers, the math will in fact not work out in most games. It will only work out in the aggregate numbers summed from many, many games played. It's not the player's job to play your game 50 times and provide a spreadsheet and see it from the omniscient designer viewpoint. Their job is to play one game at a time and judge each game as an independent event. It's incidental if they play your game once or hundreds of times, or thousands of times in an app. They are living many lifetimes from the first-person perspective, not collecting mass census data on the behalf of the design. If the designer tries to tell you it's mathematically balanced, they're probably so tuned into the big picture that they're missing the small picture. You playing it. You, a human, a small number being affected by other small numbers. And to sum that up, what he's basically saying is, it doesn't matter if a game is balanced on average. It doesn't matter if the experience works in the long run. The game is meant to be experienced in a single play. So for someone to have a bad experience of a single play is in fact reflective of a valid critique on the experience itself. Now don't get me wrong, it can certainly get better. The reason Food Chain Magnate is right next to me is because Food Chain Magnate was one of the first videos I put out. And it was more of a response to Tom Vassell having played Food Chain Magnate once and not liking it. And I put out a review, not attacking him, I'm totally fine with reviewing a game once, but I put out a video talking about why I think it wasn't a good experience for him. Why I think he was negatively affected by the way the game was presented and the way the players played the game, and the expectations set by the players. I think Food Chain Magnate is an incredible experience, but I also think that the way you get it to the table the first time will have a huge impact on whether you like it. And that is a flaw in the game. That is 100% a flaw in Food Chain Magnate, and if people review the game after playing it once and say it's not for them, that is relevant data. Because the fact that a game like Food Chain Magnate is so incredible and so amazing, but does require a bunch of cycles of different things to align perfectly for you to experience that is certainly a flaw. Does it mean I'm not going to own it? Of course not. I love this game. For me, I'm one of the lucky ones who had a good first play. I'm one of the lucky ones who did not have different aspects of the game lined up against me and basically setting me against the game from the beginning. Do I believe that a single play is indicative of a full picture of a game? No. But do I believe that a single play with a single review after a single play, even if that play is negative, do I believe that is a valid strike against the game? Yes. Which leads to my next point, which I think it is essential, that disclaimers are always placed. If you're going to play a game once, you should have a disclaimer. In fact, I would argue even 2-3 times, to whatever degree you think your audience cares, I think you should disclaim that you have only played that game X number of times. But keep in mind, disclaimers are a tricky road for the exact reasons I already brought up. Because same problem. Where is that line? How many plays do you need under your belt before you can stop giving a disclaimer? Is it 2, 3, 4? I don't have the answer. I would go with whatever you think your audience would care about. Sadly, but that's not a definitive answer, unfortunately, because there is no definitive answer. So just disclaim it to a degree. But what else do you have to disclaim? Do you have to disclaim that you played it with a less optimal player count? Your preferred genre of game? Maybe if you're a war gamer, you should say, I'm a war gamer and I played this game. I think those are valid. But how far down that rabbit hole do we go? Do we talk about, what if you're in a bad mood? If you're in a bad mood that day, should you disclaim, I played this game for the first time while I was in a bad mood? It's relevant, isn't it? But does it have to be a part of the review process? What about if coming off a long game of TI4, of Twilight Imperium 4, you've just been playing for 8 hours and you try a new game? Isn't that valid as well? Even not having a cup of coffee could be a valid reason why you are not in your primal A game for whatever that is. And this part, by the way, does apply to movies, music, books, etc. You could have negative first experiences that are biased by other criteria. It could have been raining outside and you got to the theater wet. It could be that the book you read, you had to wait 3 weeks to get from the library and now you're a little bit done with that concept. Anything can be. The music you listen to could have been in bad headphones. There are any number of side things that can affect the experience that you have. But ultimately, reviews aren't gospel. They are data points. A singular review is only beneficial in and of to the point that your audience reflects the same taste. If I have a bunch of viewers, which I know I do, that feel like they basically align with me on some games, well then yes, my review, my data point should carry more weight with those viewers. But otherwise, it shouldn't, really. It should just be another data point, just like anything else. And all those data points are valid in the aggregate sphere of where these data points have to lie. Again, with caveats. Give the caveats to a degree, understanding that disclaimers will only get you so far because there's never an end. Which is ultimately why I believe that you can review a game once. For the practical reason that... Two practical reasons. One is that because there is no defining line, we have to allow it to a degree. And two is because I believe a singular negative experience is still reflective of something. Give the disclaimer so the audience knows where it's coming from, but of course it's still reflective of something. And finally, my third reason is practical. My first two are more philosophical. I believe it's okay because of these reasons. But my third reason is more practical. I believe that people want the following 3 things. They often want the following 3 things. And those 3 things are, they want reviewers to play games multiple times before reviewing. They are often upset that too many reviews are positive and that we don't have enough negative critiquing reviews in the industry. And they also want reviewers to not take money for publishers in any context because it will bias them towards giving positive reviews. Those are 3 things that don't work well together. Those 3 things will just not happen. Because here's the problem. There are a handful of people in this space, in the board game media space, who are actually making a living from doing this. There are a handful of people. The rest are making a few bucks on the side while pursuing a passion for board games. Are you really the person who's going to tell someone else to kill their passion by playing a game they hate multiple times for no real compensation? Is that how this works? because it's likely not going to happen. The only real way to convince someone to play a game multiple times for your benefit that they don't like so that they can give a review would be to pay them for it. Which, by the way, is why the video game industry can do this. GameSpot has hundreds of people, I don't know hundreds, they have multiple people on staff with full-time salaries playing video games because this is literally their job. Video games are a bigger industry than board games, and while of course I hope and expect board games to get there, until they do, board game media is ultimately mostly a passion project, and that means you cannot realistically ask someone to go through an experience they didn't like multiple times just so they can give you a data point. Which means you can just get a bunch of positive reviews, which is generally what we see a lot more of. This is why we see things like a lot more focus on when a game is okay or good. We get a lot more feedback and commentary on that, and far fewer feedback on when the game is negative. Because people don't push back nearly as much when you give a positive review, when you play it fewer times, and additionally, it's easier to play a game you liked multiple times. Playing a game you didn't like multiple times is hard. So either welcome and embrace the fact that people will give reviews after one play with the disclaimer, or understand what you're signing yourself up for. Again, you can't have all three, not practically. You can't have multiple times before reviewing, stop having all positive reviews, and don't take money from any publishers because it biases you. And it does, by the way. Money does bias you, even anything biases you, really. But that's basically it. Two philosophical reasons and one practical reason as to why I personally believe that you can review a game after playing it once. And I know this is the worst part. I believe you can even give an opinion on a game after not experiencing even a full play. Again, disclaimers, give disclaimers. But yeah, if you had a hard time even getting through a game, if you have a hard time finishing a movie, isn't that relevant too? If you can't get past, the first half of a movie, isn't that a relevant data point? I don't know. You tell me. That's basically it. I'm Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo. I hope this was a fun conversation. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of things here. I generally am. I'm sure I'm missing a whole bunch of aspects to this conversation that I didn't think through. Ultimately, I believe that a singular play of a game is not going to be nearly as helpful as reviewing it after multiple plays. Because the more you play a game, the more you can round out that experience. The more you can see whether perhaps a game you thought was good, after multiple plays you see there's only one real path to victory. Perhaps a game you thought was bad, after multiple plays you see how it really is better in different ways. But ultimately, I also believe that there are many games that I'm not going to play again. And for many other reviewers out there, this is the same problem that you see across the board. There are not enough negative reviews. People hate negative reviews. They fight back against them. How dare you not like that game? But we also want to see more of them, which is an interesting conversation in and of itself. But that's for another day. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from BoardGameCo. Please let me know what I missed in the comments down below. Please just be a part of the conversation, whether it's with me, with other commenters. I'm always interested to see it. And have a good one.